Yeah. Yes, I'm glad you put the shout out for MLK Day as well, Martin Luther King Day, an important holiday celebration here in the U.S. and I think even all over the world, people are familiar with Martin Luther King Jr. So as we get started, I just want to invite each of us to get into the room together. I know, in the days of Zoom and meetings all over the place, everybody's hopping from one thing to the next. So I'm just take a moment to take a breath and to know that you've arrived here safely to a webinar called Navigating Uncertainty. And certainly uncertainty is the topic of the day. It was the topic of the year. And even as we move into 2021, uncertainty is certainly something we're getting very familiar with. But as we kick this off, I actually want to take us back to another time, a day about 12 years ago, that was also a very uncertain day. And I want to tell you something that happened that day. There was a flight that took off out of LaGuardia Airport in New York. It was flight 1549, and about 5 miles from the airport, the airplane actually hit a flock of geese. And people, the pilots immediately knew there's no way that we're going to make it back to an airport. And so they took very quick action. And you probably have even heard of the story because as the airplane lost engine power, the pilots redirected it and landed on the Hudson River in the middle of Midtown Manhattan. Right. So, Teresa, if you hit down, are you having trouble?
Yeah, well, I'm...
All right, let's give Teresa 1 second.
There we go. It did not want to advance. Okay.
Okay, and also I'm just going to ask you have the ability to unmute yourselves because we made this a place where we could talk later. But if you wouldn't mind right now just muting yourself while we go through the presentation, that would be helpful. Okay, so back to our story. So you can change the slide, Teresa, because this is a picture you might be familiar with, and it actually happened 12 years ago last Friday. All 155 people aboard this flight were saved. And we ended up calling it the Miracle on the Hudson. And there's even a movie that's been made about it. But what we later learned is that the pilot who was navigating this plane, a gentleman by the name of Chelsea Sullenberger, was actually a former fighter pilot in the US Air Force. And so I kind of wonder, what happened for him in that moment when he realized that he couldn't land the plane, he couldn't get back to safety? What kicked in? Was there some kind of internal navigation system that got activated in that moment where he was able to turn back and all the years of practice as a fighter pilot, he knew exactly what to do? When this incident was made into a movie called Miracle on the Hudson, there was a film critic who went to see it. And his comment was, it is a story of human beings prevailing in the time of crisis. That's how he felt about the movie. And really, that's what we're here to talk about today. How do we prevail in crisis? Because organizations and leaders can actually do really well in crisis when they have that kind of navigation system that kicks in, right? Because their inner navigation system is something that's become internalized or operationalized, like a steady hand guiding the plane. They know exactly what to do, how to behave, and everybody knows how to come on board. And that kind of navigation system is important at any time, but it's particularly important in times of crisis. So what we'd like to talk about today is how do you build that kind of a navigation system? And that's something that Teresa and I have been working on for a while.
Yeah, you might look at these pictures and think they're a few years old. That's because this is Cynthia and I when we started our first business. So just to back up for a second, my name is Teresa Agresta, and if you don't know us, Cynthia, as she might have mentioned, is my business partner and my sister. And we first started working with this material that we're going to share with you today almost 20 years ago. We had a business that was grounded in building brands for organizations. And we did that by measuring culture. And we really were passionate about culture, and we were passionate about the outcomes that we could have for organizations when we did things this way. Because when we measured culture, what we found is that we were able to create a brand story that really resonated. It connected people. It created really deep ownership. And ultimately, the impact of that and the results of that were going far past the brand itself. Because we found that when we could measure these deeper layers of what was going on in an organization, that clients really wanted to tap into that story over and over again, that it could do more than just tell the story about who they are as a brand. It could really help them to onboard and engage employees who were a good fit. It would help them to recruit and attract people to the organization. Maybe that it would help to find a right merger partner, ways in which they wanted to grow their organization. So there were many different ways when they kept tapping back into that same culture profile. And we were very busy. We were continuing to go back year after year to work with these clients on more initiatives. And we came to see that the system we're going to talk about today and the ideas that we're going to share with you, which are really grounded in storytelling, could be powerful well beyond the development of a brand. And there was a lot more that companies could do with that material and that information. There were a lot of connected business challenges that became easier to solve when organizations really understood that, that material. So what I want to do is sort of take that background and that history and ground it in the conversations and the place where we find ourselves today. So first question is, where are we and how did we get here? We're starting to refer to the time that, before COVID as BC. And back, about a year ago, we really felt like we had big problems. That was before we even had the challenges that we've just, still working through in 2020 and 2021. You remember we were thinking about, environmental crises, the Me Too movement. We had the immigration conversations that were really tense. We had lots of political strife. We had Brexit, which is still coming up and through in the UK, and lots of political conversations like impeachment happening not once but twice here in the US. And we've really continued to just go through one crisis after the next in this year since then. Obviously, a global pandemic that is really continuing to reshape the way that we work. We have had worldwide protests with regard to racial equity and police brutality. And just this month, not even a few weeks ago, a uprising at the US Capitol. So businesses have really had to take a stand on issues that a few years ago would have been unthinkable. These are new challenges, and we're living in a lot of crises. So what I'd like to do as we think about these pressures that have been shaping the way that our businesses have had to respond in the operations right now, and as we understand these pressures that have really made a difference to us as consultants and leaders in the ways that we need to support and lead teams. So take a moment and just share with us some of the biggest challenges. Go ahead and put them in the chat. What have you been facing? On the personal side, how has this year impacted you? Because we know that no one has escaped. Maybe you've had employment challenges. Maybe health and wellness have been, part of what you've had to deal with yourself, or perhaps your family, or perhaps you're going into a workplace where you feel like, maybe things aren't safe. Cynthia's going to share with us some of the thoughts that are coming up through the chat. Maybe some of your challenges have been more on the business side or the professional side. Maybe you've been dealing with diversity and inclusion conversations in your workplace, and you're the one responsible for that.
So Teresa, we're starting to get some feedback, people that are trying to stay grounded. Chuck missing his kids and his grandkids and not getting to see them. Deepening into trust and surrender. And then David, who's had no personal challenges at the moment, but 95% of his business has evaporated due to COVID. Someone who's left their job and just started a consulting practice just as COVID began. So just some examples.
Yeah. So it's clear that no one has escaped, and also that the impact of these two things, sort of back and forth, that the organizations and the individuals are intertwined, and that we want to recognize that the healthy development of one is impacted by the success of the other. So these two things, sort of flow back and forth. And it's always been true, but I think today more than ever, this is really obvious. We think that you need a system to help navigate and to, bring success to both individuals and to organizations. And we're going to share with you the system that we teach at Culture. And a little bit later, we will give you an opportunity to learn more about the system and even to consider becoming certified in it so that you can deliver this type of work to clients and perhaps become part of the Culture Talk community. So let me tell you a little bit more about what we're talking about, this navigation system. In our experience, there are 5 essential attributes to navigating culture successfully. And, we're attuned to working in navigation systems these days. We wouldn't go anywhere in our cars, for instance, without one. We've really come to rely on them because it helps us to understand not only where we are in the moment, where are we starting from, but where are we headed to and how are we going to get there safely? And that really helps us to map out and think through a successful approach to things. And it's if we thought it was necessary, before we were in such crisis, really now it's more critical than ever. So let's take a look at what are these 5 essential attributes, and then we're going to take a look at them one by one and go through them for you. So first, you need to have a defined framework, a way to think about culture and to lay it out so that everyone can understand it. Once you have that, you need a tool to measure it. As you take that information into your organization, it needs to be able to scale easily and effectively in a way that brings people into the conversation and on board. It needs to be sustainable. I think we've all had enough of check the box programs that really don't drive meaningful change. And last, in today's always on world, we need to be able to share it. So let's break those down one by one.
Great. So number 1, we're going to talk about, first, everybody's talking about culture, but it's a little bit like this fish trying to talk about the water that it's swimming in. Culture is intangible and it's hard to talk about. Or perhaps this is even worse. Sometimes we think we're in a conversation about culture and we're even using the same words, but those words, we mean different things by them. I'm also thinking about the tale of the blind men and the elephant. An elephant wanders into a village, the blind men hear about it, and they decide to go see what this animal is. And each of them touches a different part of the elephant to try to discern what is this creature. One touches its tail and thinks it's a snake. Another one touches an ear and feels as it's a fan. One touches its leg and feels like it's a tree. So one thing that we can take away from this parable is the understanding that while our subjective experience is true, it also inherently lacks truth because it fails to take into account the full picture. So if your culture conversation is going like this, where everybody's just seeing a piece of it, that's the kind of culture conversation where walls can go up, where people can get defensive and want to, talk about only what exists in their part of the company versus the whole organization. So people might dig in deeper. So as Teresa said, the first attribute that we talk about is having a framework. To facilitate a meaningful framework that builds, conversation and gets everybody using the same language and building consensus around something, you need to establish, a language that everybody can learn. This framework should apply both to individuals, because Teresa showed us those two sides, but also to the organizational cultures. When we see teams adopt a common framework, that becomes a foundation around which you can build. You can build on that framework. You can build alignment with what exists already in the organization with new ideas. This is the framework that we use at Culture Talk. So if you're already familiar with archetypes, maybe just shout a yes out in the panel, in the chat panel. We use a framework that we didn't make up. It's based on universal human stories that we call archetypes. And it was the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung that first introduced this concept, or the word archetype, to describe this concept. And what he meant by that were, he noticed that there were certain patterns and themes that showed up in human experience over and over again. And when we look at these patterns, we see that they might show up in individuals as personalities, as ways that, the stories of our lives are going, but they also can show up in groups as culture. And by starting to understand archetypes, we can start to understand the underlying motivations that are driving individual or organizational behavior. So just take a look. These are the 12 archetypes we use here. And I bet even just scanning this list, if you're not familiar with archetypes, it's easy to say, well, heroes save the day. Revolutionaries might be people like Martin Luther King, who really are about transforming things on a big level. Or magicians transform as well, but from a different way. But these storylines are very familiar. So even ask yourself, is there one or more of these storylines that you see in yourself? Or if you're thinking about the organization that you work for or work with, are there certain patterns that you could see? And one of the reasons this framework is so effective with organizations is because people have a quick recognition of these patterns. It's like a shortcut to understanding. And you can quickly get people on the same page about what type of culture exists within a group. And then that gives you a language to talk about culture in a meaningful way. So I'll just dig into two archetypes. Let's talk about the hero, right? We all know a hero when we see one. This is the kind of person who is very goal-oriented and ready to take action. They're known for persevering through difficult challenges. But the hero pattern also has behaviors that show up as shadows. And so that's when, a hero might come across as a person who's a little bit overly competitive, who might fight to win at any cost, or the kind of person that maybe is so focused on acting that they fail to think through, they're a little short-sighted, they fail to think through the details. Or I'll give you an example now of a culture, of an organizational culture. Explore is another of the patterns. And it's a pattern that's all about independence and freedom. In explore cultures, these are the kinds of organizations that are moving us forward, that are showing us what's just over the horizon. They tend to be light on formal structure and large on flexibility and letting people find their own path. But there can be some frustrations in an explorer culture, because sometimes it might feel like the kind of place where there's no strategy, no cohesive way of looking at where we're going, or maybe it feels like the strategy keeps changing. So it can be frustrating to work in that kind of a culture. So archetypes are the framework, and that's the first essential attribute. Teresa, take us to number 2.
Okay, number 2. So one reason that it's hard to talk about culture is because it's reflected in what we like to call the unwritten rules of engagement. So even when we attempt to write them down and we lay out our expectations, maybe through the employee handbook or our mission, vision, and value statements or other, well-prepared documents that we put together, there's this whole gray area, a gap that exists between what we expect and what we actually tolerate in an organization. And those are the things that are not captured in writing. And that's really where we start to measure some really important cultural elements. So this culture shows up in our shared values, but it's also in topics that are taboo, things that we're not sure it's even okay to talk about, like politics, for instance, or the balance between home and family life. Does anybody care to define what work-life balance means today? We talk about diversity and inclusion, but are we really allowed to bring that topic up? And how do we address it in our workplace? Do we do more than pay lip service to topics like that, or health and wellness? What are we doing, really speaks a lot more volume than what we say about what we believe. It's also very idiosyncratic. So the very things that are difficult to force, like interpersonal relationships, what happens when you're working late and you're developing ties with the staff that are there with you? What about lunchtime meetings, back when we used to do those in person? And the jokes that we share, or the gripes or complaints that we share, all of those things are this uncaptured, unwritten aspect of our culture. So the question comes, can you actually measure it? Now, I'm going to share a comic with you that's about 10 years old, but I think it makes a really important point, and I doubt things have changed all that much. These diagrams actually come out of communication patterns that were measured at the various technology companies. And it shows the general flow of communication. Look at Amazon. Everything looks very hierarchical. And at Google, maybe not so much. Facebook has a real network in place, and Microsoft looks like they might have a war going on. So you can see by looking at these different diagrams just how different cultures are, even when we are looking at companies within a similar industry. So the second attribute that's really essential is measurement. Now, if you don't have a framework, then you're stuck believing that culture is kind of a list of symptoms, maybe perks that you have to add up, and it might be nebulous or too hard to measure. But when you have a framework like the one that we shared with you, you can actually measure against it. If you start by diagnosing things that are symptoms on the surface, like the perks I talked about, or a list of benefits, perhaps, that's kind of a trap, and it can have very limited impact. And it's really a shame when that's where people start to focus when they think about a culture conversation. It's also really important when you think about a measurement system to eliminate finger pointing and blame. A lot of times, leaders will really be afraid to even initiate a culture conversation because they're afraid that they're going to get a score or something that labels their culture as good or bad. And so, when you're looking at a framework and a measurement system, you really want to be sure that it's one that opens the door to conversation, allows people to stay safe and be vulnerable, and eliminates that fear of judgment. And I think that's really important. And Cynthia demonstrated this continuum between the strength and the shadow sides of archetypes, because organizational culture and personality exist on this continuum where our biggest strength sometimes can bleed over into our biggest challenges. And so we're really lucky that archetypes are human stories. They're both rich and colorful, but they're also flawed, just like real human beings. And for that reason, we can use them to position and identify the things that we're good at, as well as those trouble spots, those shadow traits where we have opportunity for growth. For instance, that goal achieving hero that we just heard about, who lives to conquer challenges and save the day, also becomes the aggressive bully who overruns everybody else in a quest for the next win. You need a measurement tool that eliminates that finger pointing, like I was talking about, and the blame, and reduces fear and allows people to remain safe. Also, each one of us and each of our organizations has the capacity for all 12 of these patterns, and yet we have preferences. A certain few tend to rise to the top and become ones that we lean on over and over again. And we can also use things like these diagrams, which show how uniquely our different patterns show up and how we lean on them in different ways. And this is where those stories really come to life in ways that are unique and meaningful to each individual or to each organization. This is all part of thinking about measuring that culture. So,
And now you can hear exactly what this guy's thinking. He said, we measured it. What? So what? Now what? How many times have you used an assessment tool or taken somebody, an organization, a team through some kind of intervention? And, it feels to them like a check the box or a flavor of the month initiative. That brings us to essential attribute number 3. If you survey your team, if you ask for an opinion about cultural issues, you really need to be prepared not just to share the results, but some kind of action plan to change. If you don't do something with the results, morale can actually be negatively affected. So when we identify challenges or opportunities in the culture, we need a robust program that helps us scale. So measuring culture can be a powerful starting point, but that should actually take us somewhere from point A to where we want to go. Culture can actually become the through line for a change management experience. So I want to share a few ways that we can use a baseline culture audit like a map to transform people and also the shared cultural experience. Here are a handful of ways that we have coaches, consultants, and in-house trainers applying archetypes in their organizations. And they're bottom line focused. So we'll just give you a handful. First, mergers and acquisitions, obviously a super popular way to grow, but also a path to growth that can be very complicated. And one of the reasons it's complicated is actually because you need to merge two cultures together. And in fact, statistics say about 80% of mergers never reach their full potential because of a cultural issue. So we want to measure culture. Culture change initiatives. How, if we want to shift, if we're having some kind of new threat to our business, some kind of new opportunity in our business, but we need the team to come along and we need to shift the culture in some way. We need to first start by knowing, where are we? What is the as is culture? What needs to change, so that we can identify the behaviors that need to change. Brand and marketing. Teresa shared, this is kind of the door that we entered for many years, applying archetypes to brands. And certainly the stories loan themselves to helping an organization uncover that real authentic purpose that can be translated in through a brand or an employment brand. Recruiting and retention. This is an area of the company where there tends to be a lot of numbers. People know kind of what they're spending on hiring and getting people onboarded and up to speed. And with a system like Archetypes, there's actually a number of different ways that you can apply it to getting people integrated into your organization in a way that gets them engaged really early on through an investment in them. And then once they're there and they're continuing to be part of the organization, what can you offer them? We know people stay in an organization longer when they feel that they're being developed, and there's a number of different ways you can do that with archetypes. And then finally, reputation and crisis management. We're talking about crisis now, but we could also think about the crisis that some companies have, reputational crises, right? And that happens when they are acting out of alignment with what they said and who they said they are. So again, this cultural assessment through archetypes can be applied out in that way. So lots of different ways to bring archetypes into connected business challenges. Teresa, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you.
You're back.
So when we think about the ways in which our teams have changed, maybe through this crisis, and in some ways even prior to this, the demands and the desires that employees are placing on their companies today are really challenging. People are looking for a connection. And Gallup, who measures what employees are thinking and asking for each year, came back in 2020 and reemphasized that younger employees especially want purpose and meaning from their work. And they really want somebody who's going to lead them and guide them. They want a coach who's going to be able to connect with them, both from their personal perspective and help to grow and manage their career. So they're looking for connection. Another trusted resource, LinkedIn, in 2020, measuring what soft skills the companies need most. And looking at this list, we can really start to understand the tie between how can you use things like archetypes to understand how an employee measures around creativity, emotional intelligence, and collaboration. These are the things that we're hearing over and over again that we need to be able to train and to tie together internally in our organizations. So the next, the thing that we can learn most about, Gallup and LinkedIn, other things that we're reading in reports, is that we need to do more than kind of check the box. In order to get to those kinds of results, we really need to be looking at developing programs that are much more sustainable, things that are built on a foundation that's memorable and actionable and lasting. And you also need to, just like back at the beginning, we said you need to be able to tie the individual to the organization and understand that it's not just about the company, but it's about the way that the individual and their beliefs and a sense of purpose tie back and align with the organization. So we need an approach to our culture that is sustainable. In our experience, one of the primary benefits of working with archetypes is the lasting impact and the ability to apply the outcome across multiple cultural initiatives, even as an organization evolves over time. And some of the ways that our cultures need to evolve include areas that we're really focused on today, like diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're talking about new generations in the workplace, integrating remote teams in a way that we didn't have to just a few months ago. So these new ways of thinking and working together are really never going to be resolved through a canned training or just a check the box. Yeah, we did that. We took care of that. We need to have a tool like Archetypes that are really that would really enable us to go deeper and to do that very quickly and to touch people at a level that brings them together around shared stories and shared meaning, and do it in a way that keeps them safe and keeps them connected to the purpose of the organization. So going beyond lip service on these conversations is really important if we hope to create lasting change. Now, moving into another area, Dave Matten of Trend Watching looked at our organizations and said, hey, business used to be like a black box. We could paint whatever we wanted on the outside and say what we wanted about ourselves. Today, that is no longer true. He talks about businesses and organizations today being glass boxes because you can see all the way inside. You can see everything that's happening largely through the impact of social media. So this ability to share anything at any time has, and instantaneously means that leaders no longer control the stories about their organizations. And so that brings us to our fifth attribute, and that's shareability. You really need to have sort of in this always on world that we're living in, with our attention spans shorter and shorter, you really need to be able to have the ability to share your culture navigation system in a way that is fun and engaging. And you definitely want to have things that are catchy and sticky and are easy to remember. They definitely also need to be Instagrammable. So whether that's your purview and something that you feel comfortable with, or whether you are working to bring that out, through your staff and have somebody else get involved with this, things need to be able to be visually friendly and have a sticky factor. We want them to be able, employees to be proud of sharing their profiles and to feel good about the stories they're telling, not only about their own careers, but the way that ladders up to their sense of connection to their organization and how that gives them personal meaning as well. So stickiness really requires that we connect with each other too. This is just a peek at sharing how two archetypes might be compared in a relationship, and understanding that the people on our team want to know our story, and we want to be able to effectively share more about ourselves with them as well. So these are some tools that can help develop a stronger awareness and help managers to lead teams and help them to grow by being able to share their own stories and the culture of the organization as a whole. So, a navigation system that helps us to safely land the plane, especially when we're having really challenging times. So are you ready to land the plane?
Yeah. So first, I want to thank everybody who joined us today. Teresa and I really appreciate you coming to join us. And we're going to have a few minutes at the end to hear your thoughts and ideas about the navigation system that we described. But first, I want to share a couple opportunities with you. Because here at Culture Talk, we have, if I go back to the BC, before COVID, and kind of the moment we're living in, what we know is that we've got really big challenges today, and that we need to stop playing small, and we need to find ways to create change. We're calling 2021 the year of change that matters. How do we help organizations and leaders change on a deeper level? So as we kick off this year, we are looking to grow our community of coaches, consultants, and in-house trainers that are curious about bringing archetypes and this system into their engagements. And so I want to tell you, first of all, Culture Talk as a system, let me tell you what that's about. It actually hits on all 5 of these attributes that we've been talking about. At its foundation, there are 2 assessment tools that are validated assessment tools. One measures archetype in individual. The other one measures archetype in organizational culture. And around those 2 assessment tools, we built a whole system of modularized workshops, ready to go training and facilitations, buttons, card decks, lots of things that make this kind of learning fun and sticky. And the way that we integrate new consultants in using Culture Talk is through our signature certification program. We have our next certification cohort kicking off on February 3rd. And let me tell you about what that program includes. First of all, it is an 8-week program that we deliver via Zoom with a small cohort. The classes are 2 hours. And when you sign up, you get, we've just given you a sampling of the materials. You have access to everything that is part of Culture Talk. You also have access to a library of materials that's deliberately designed to help consultants and coaches use the work and sell the work. You get a 3-month membership in our partner community, which I'll talk about a little in a minute. And you have access to wholesale pricing on the 2 assessment tools, both the cultural assessment and the individual personality assessment. That's what our certified partners have access to. Here's a recent partner call. I kind of can't emphasize enough how awesome the community of people that are involved with Culture Talk is, and the kinds of the level of work that they're doing, the kinds of things that they care about. And we do these in small cohorts that really get to know each other. Many of the people that train together go on and continue to do work together, or they start to find ways to collaborate. Because we have people that are specialists in brand, people that are specialists in mergers and acquisitions, leadership development, all different kinds of experts that are kind of cross-pollinating this work and their ideas. And our community has actually grown on an international level. So we do have quite a few people in the US where Teresa and I are based, but you can see from this map, we've reached out, got a number, we've even got some of our Australian partners on the call today. So feel free to say hello in the chat. And we have a number of partners that are here today. I know they love to just come and support us and also hear what else we're talking about these days. But we have people as far away as Singapore, might be the furthest. And India. And so hearing that about the program, about this system, you might be asking, is Culture Talk right for me? And I would offer to you that if you or your team have the experience and the desire to lead these deeper conversations, and you've been looking for the right tool set and a language and things that are ready to go and easy to apply, that this program is for you. Or if you are looking to move beyond kind of just touching the surface of things and going deeper and really building change within an organization that's sustainable, maybe expand your services into new areas, work more deeply with clients, then this program is for you. And if you're someone that likes to put your head around a complex problem, we're here to help support you in taking this tool set into your engagements. Now, I recognize that not everybody's looking for that kind of a system, and maybe, maybe your business is more about one and done, and then maybe this program is not for you. What you get when you become a certified partner, as I said, is you've got everything that we've built ready to go so that you can, take these tools and materials into your engagements to shift, create change and do great things with teams and leaders. And, you know, this is the work that needs to be done today in businesses. This is the work that in crisis where people are looking for assistance and for help. Here's also a couple of comments about what our certified partners have to say when they come back from an engagement, because they often call us to share that, you know, they get a lot of really positive feedback. A lot of people have these big light bulbs that go off. And even months and years later, the impact of the work is being felt, and it's clients are calling them back to come do more built around this foundation with archetypes. So as you consider those things, we have some exciting news today. We actually are just hot off the presses getting ready to launch an Intro to Archetypes course that we will eventually launch to the public, but right now it's only for people coming through certification. And it is a 7-video mini e-course to introduce you to the 12 patterns, to let you take a culture talk for individuals assessment, to learn your archetypes, to build a profile, and to start to understand, you know, how would you apply this work out to leaders, teams, and organizational cultures. And we're including that course with certification. If you signed up for the February 3rd class, we'd actually get you started on that course right away, so that you could come into a February 3rd certification class kind of ready to go. And I mentioned our international partner community. So we have a special launch package that we use to help new partners get going. And that package gives you everything, gives you access to everything that our partner community has. You get a couple surveys as well to get you going, and you get some coaching specifically around how to integrate culture talk, maybe with your brand, your offerings, how to design proposals. We can even ride shotgun with you on an engagement if needed. So these are all part of coming through certification. And then we have one more special, just because you came to the webinar. If you decide to join us for the February class, we're also including a bonus package, $100 worth of some of the facilitation tools like buttons and card decks that can be used when we get back to in-person training that you would get as part of signing up for our February class. And we promise, we're so confident. We get such incredible feedback from the people that come through this experience that we are happy to offer a guarantee. So if you decide to join us and you come to 2 of the sessions and you do your homework and you engage and you really try it on and see, is this something that would make sense for you, and you're not satisfied, we'll actually refund your money after that second session. So we have 7 spots left for our February 3rd cohort. And after that, we'll be taking a waiting list. And you get all of everything I just described. I think, Teresa, you have one more slide, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The cost, the investment for culture talk certification is $19.97. And it includes all of the extras that we just talked about. So the Intro to Archetypes course, the starter kit with buttons and card decks, as well as the Welcome to Culture Talk launch package. So if you're intrigued, we'd love to talk to you. Teresa's going to pop into the chat links to our calendars if you'd like to do a call and learn more about that opportunity. And we'd love, we'd actually love to invite you now to give us some feedback, ask some questions, share what you're thinking about the concept of using archetypes in organizations. And Rachel, I see you waving, but just feel free to unmute yourself. I think we're small enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I just want to start off by saying like how amazing it is to hear both of you speak, because I'm a coach, but I work more one-on-one. And whereas my boyfriend is learning and development and like leadership coach for a company. And he's been met with like just a lot of struggle right now, because though he was hired to be in this role, there's tons of micromanaging, and it sounds like, I'm just, listening to what he's reflecting back to me, but much resistance to change. There's an emphasis on getting like delivering the product and like getting things out, and like there's a lot of demand. And so he's really struggling because he knows what he believes in, he knows what his role is, and yet when he brings that, he's like, I mean, he even told me about how like someone was screaming at him, like, how dare he, try to change this. And so I'm just curious, like, no more backstory. Oh, sorry, my low battery just popped up. But that, like, what would you advise to someone who you're saying, like, you're encouraging people to take leadership in the company that they're working for, and they might not have, what if there's like, how would you overcome that obstacle? And like, what would you tell to that person who might be afraid of being met with like getting fired, or like all of the confrontation that could come with that?
And are you speaking then, Rachel, specifically? Is it Rachel? My eyes just went.
Yeah.
My eyes
Yes.
just went blurry on the screen. And are you speaking specifically about archetypes, using archetypes, or I just want to make sure I'm clear on the question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you
People
can do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's anything. I'm more like open-minded to how, like, what your philosophy and approach is, and while you use the archetypes, you can speak to that if there's any other
Yeah, I mean, I think that change and resistance obviously go hand in hand. And, all of the things we described doing with Culture Talk on a lot of levels, it's either about changing who we are as individuals and leaders and growing and evolving, or it's about changing the dynamics of a team, or it's about changing the culture itself. And these are, it's change is hard. And what we find with a system like this is that it's very easy for people to access archetype, right? There are stories that people understand already. And so from that perspective, it makes things a little bit more human and user friendly as a way to talk about what needs to change. Teresa, in her part of the presentation, talked a lot about, the non-judgmental aspect of it. And so those are some of the things I think would be relevant.
Okay.
Other thoughts, questions?
Yeah, and I did put into the chat links to both Cynthia's and my calendars. So if you had questions and you thought it might take a little bit longer, or if you wanted more information, you could also use those links to schedule a call directly.
And anyone who's here, who's actually a certified partner already, feel free to, shout out, because we've got a really dynamic group. I see Chuck and Lewis still on my screen. I know I saw Claire and Dan. And
I just actually unmuted myself. I'm so glad that I went through the program. Now I have recently completed the program, so I'm newer to it myself. I completed it in November, actually, right? I think the Monday before Thanksgiving.
Yes.
I completed it. I've been trying to absorb things, and I am getting ready to begin an group of individual assessments for company. And then I am actually going to teach a class to people that I hope about individual archetypes that I hope leads to some contracts for corporate brand archetypes. So I'm just really glad that I did it, and looking forward to signing up for the packages and all of those things, working with Cynthia to figure it all out. But it's really learned a lot.
Yeah, and it's a new area of work for you as well, Chuck, right? It's an expansion of services.
It's an extension where it's one part of our expansion. It was part of our Navigating the uncertainties. So it was one of the pivots we made during 2020, during the time we had to reflect on who would we become in 2021.
Right.
So,
Change. More change.
yeah.
I
Other-
might just add I might add a comment, Cynthia. Hello,
Yeah.
everyone from Australia. I went through the program last April, May as one of my COVID projects, and it's been very, very useful because I'm transitioning out of a sort of corporate environment more into working for myself in the consulting space. And I found it really helpful in understanding myself, in looking at some of the patterns, some of the history, some of the stories of the organisations I've worked for and how they sort of come through in who I am now. So that's been quite useful. And I think as well, when you start going into organisations and getting a bit of a feel of the place, you may not have to run the organisation through the survey. You might be able to work it out for yourself through some of the clues that you see, but being skilled in knowing what the archetypes are is really handy in sort of doing that, I think. So big thumbs up. I think it's a great program.
Mm-hmm. And Lewis, thank you. And also, Lewis, you're starting to run some workshops for individuals who are facing career transitions, using archetypes as a framework for helping people kind of understand their storylines. Claire, who's here also working on that with you, kind of who am I? How did I get here to this point in my story today, and what needs to change or evolve, or how do I define my story going forward? Is the workshops as I understand them. Yeah,
it is. And this we actually ran through with a colleague who I'd worked with for a couple of years, and I thought I knew him, and then we did culture talk, and I know him at a whole different level now.
Yeah, we hear that. Teresa, what was the comment from the workshop you ran a couple of years ago?
I learned more about my colleagues in the last 4 hours than I did over the last 4 years. I love that one. It was so succinct, delivered by a young man on the way out the door.
Yeah. Archetypes, definitely a different way to get to know people at a deeper level. Other questions? Okay.
Okay. Yeah, well, thank you very much for joining us this evening, this morning, wherever, whatever wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is. We really appreciate a chance to share these ideas and this work with you. So
let's make 2021 a year that change that matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.